Jazz fusion is a music genre that combines jazz with musical elements from other genres such as funk, rock, and even electronic music. This style of music was pioneered by artists like Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock and actually has a long history with video games. In Japan specifically, the genre was called crossover and was seeing a lot of popularity well into the 1980s. Artists like Cassiopeia and T-Square specifically were making a big impact. This popularity spilled over into video games and ended up influencing a lot of composers, even still to this day. So jazz fusion is a culturally significant genre, not just to games as a medium, but also to me personally. So I made somewhat of a top 10 list of my favorite jazz fusion songs in video games, and while these are kinda sorta in order, think of them more as chapters of a guide where we go through different aspects of jazz fusion in video games. I'll break down what makes each of them special from a musical standpoint, and I'll get into the history of some of them also. Starting with number 10, the staff credits from Mario Kart 8. So Mario Kart 8 is a game that doesn't need much introduction. Popular kart racer from Nintendo with Mario characters. So let's talk about the staff credits theme. The reason I wanted to start with this song is because it's pretty much a great introductory showcase for the basics of jazz fusion. It has a slap bass groove going on in the background, electric piano, Sims, electric guitar riffs, and frantic modulations. Every jazz fusion song doesn't have to have all of these elements, but these are the stereotypical elements that generally define the genre, and oftentimes separate it from regular jazz. As the list goes on, we'll see a lot of these elements show up in other songs in various ways, and I'll get into more detail about them as needed. One thing I do want to highlight for Mario Kart 8 though is one of the composers that contributed to this track. The legendary drummer Satoshi Bondo from the Japanese jazz fusion band T-Square. T-Square has a long history with bringing jazz fusion to video games. They directly inspired the iconic Super Mario Bros. Theme and directly contributed to another iconic racing game that we'll discuss later in the list. You pretty much can't talk about jazz fusion in games without talking about Mario and T-Square, so this was an easy pick. Number 9 on the list is Tokyo Daylight from Persona 5. Persona 5's soundtrack was composed by Shoji Meguro, and it is well known for its usage of jazz fusion and acid jazz, almost to a fault. I talk about this a bit in my video about how video game music takes inspiration from regular music, so check that out if you haven't. The thing I love about this track is the back and forth between syncopated vocal phrases that happen for 2 bars, and then the electric piano that happens for another 2 bars. It reminds me a lot of another jazz fusion track called Blade's Theme from the 1992 movie Class Act, composed by jazz artist Vassal Benford. It has the same kind of syncopated vocal phrases that happen on the first 2 bars, and then the same kind of electric piano chord resolution that happens on these next 2 bars. I'm not saying this song took direct inspiration, by the way, but the structural similarities are super interesting to point out. The 8th song we'll discuss is the character select theme from Melty Blood Type Lumina. Melty Blood is a fighting game series based on the visual novel Tsukihime and is developed by French Bread. The composer for this soundtrack goes by the name of Raito and is possibly my favorite game composer of all time. And a big reason for that is his versatility. He can go from drum and bass to rock to jazz fusion very effortlessly. and the character select theme for Melty Blood type Lumina is no exception. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to point out that this song uses a technique called modulation, which is another common technique that we see a lot in jazz fusion. Modulation is basically when a song repeats certain parts while changing the key. In pop music, they'll oftentimes use this kind of thing on the final chorus of a song to make the song feel like it's hitting a big climax. Listen to the end of Thong Song by Cisco to get an idea of what I'm talking about. In jazz fusion, modulation is used in more random ways. For this Melty Blood track, you hear the modulation happen 3 times when the electric guitar comes in. This makes the song feel very dynamic and is one of my favorite things about jazz fusion and jazz in general, actually. The 7th song we'll discuss is the Brad Burns theme from Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown / REVO. Now, if you know me, you know I'm going to try to find a way to bring up Virtua Fighter any chance I get. But no, seriously, this track is really good and it's basically a showcase for how jazz fusion uses slap bass. Slap bass is basically this bass sound. And this song is going crazy with it. It feels very chaotic and frantic. The pianos are also giving the same chaotic, frantic energy. It's just a very bold, high energy song in general. That, and especially the slap bass, is why I wanted to highlight this track, because that slap bass is something you see very often in jazz fusion, actually. Number 6 is the main battle theme from Xenoblade 2 Torna, The Golden Country. The director of the Xenoblade series, Tetsuya Takahashi, talks about how he wanted the Golden Country expansion to have a jazz-like atmosphere after watching the 2015 movie Whiplash, and the inspiration definitely shines through on this song. Composed by Kenji Hiramatsu, the battle theme is incredible and definitely my favorite theme in the series. However, it can be kind of debated whether this is pure jazz fusion. Personally though, I'd say the frantic energy of this song and the abrupt changes in rhythm feel fusion enough. Regardless of how you want to classify it though, I do want to note that this song has a very Latin-inspired groove to it, with the staccato pianos and the fast, clicky snares. And jazz fusion has had a long history with Latin music, with artists like George Duke and Chick Corea helping to bridge that gap. The 5th song I want to discuss is a song called Opaque Air from the game Modellista. Modellista was a Capcom racing game released on PS2, GameCube, and Xbox in 2002 with a really interesting cel-shaded art style and an amazing soundtrack. And the song Opaque Air is a jazz fusion banger. It has a woodwind that goes crazy, funky bass, and a lot of the jazz fusion essentials, including some great modulation and very, very, very tight drum fills. And if you don't know, let's define what a drum fill is right quick. A drum fill is basically what happens when the drum pattern of a song briefly switches away from the main groove in order to either transition to a new part of the song or just to add a little variation to the groove. So pay attention to the drums on this part of the song. This part is the main groove. The part where it goes like this is a drum fill basically. The drums in general for this song are the star of the show in my opinion, and a great showcase of how funky jazz fusion can be. The next 2 songs I want to discuss are both from the same game, Gran Turismo 5. The 2 songs are called Slow on the Uptake and The Power of GT. The Gran Turismo series is, in my opinion, the definitive video game soundtrack to listen to if you want to learn about jazz fusion. because it covers such a wide variety of styles, and these two tracks are a perfect example of that. The Power of GT is an amazing jazz fusion song. It incorporates a lot of modulation, a lot of polyrhythms, and freeform drumming. And it has a heavy amount of electric guitar, which is arguably the defining instrument of jazz fusion. And this other track called Slow on the Uptake was composed by Satoshi Bondo from the Japanese jazz fusion band T-Square that we discussed from Mario Kart 8 earlier. And this track sounds heavily inspired by neo soul, a subgenre that combined elements of R&B, jazz, and hip hop. Artists like D'Angelo and producers like Jay Dilla are just some of the artists that paved the way for this style, with the chill electric piano chords, programmed drums, and a subtle swing to the overall instrumentation, with swing basically being when instruments are played slightly behind the tempo. Easiest example of what I'm talking about is this electric piano part of the song. So this is how it sounds when I play the chords right on the beat. Notice how I hit all the keys at the same time and kind of hit right on the beat. It kind of goes, you know, it's kind of like, it can work for some songs, but it's much more mechanical. And then this is how it sounds when I play it with some swing, basically. Notice how I strum the keys and kind of do it like a slight delay. You know, it kind of like has some fluidity to it. And that's what I love about this track so much. It has that groovy hip-hop Jay Dilla feel to it. Gran Turismo and T-Square are a big part of the history of jazz fusion in racing games. A connection that possibly even goes all the way back to the racing-inspired cover art of Cassiopeia's self-titled album, with Cassiopeia being an important Japanese jazz fusion band that had a major impact on the last two songs we're gonna discuss. Within Earshot and Raid Blue from the Sin and Punishment soundtrack. Sin and Punishment is a rail shooter developed by one of my top 5 favorite game developers of all time, Treasure Co. Limited. They made this game in collaboration with Nintendo. I could do a whole video just gushing about how much I love this game, but for now, let's stay focused on the music. Let's start with the first track, Within Earshot. This song has crazy polyrhythmic reverb drums, heavy bass, and heavily processed FM guitar, with FM sounds basically being synth sounds. And then the other track, Raid Blue, actually has a similar texture to it, with some more synths getting a chance to shine, as well as some breaks from the electric guitar that give you a chance to appreciate the drumming and the slap bass. This leads me to why I picked these as my top tracks. Sin and Punishment 64 has a very distinct musical identity. You could almost say it's hard to tell that it's jazz fusion. It's very synthy, the processing on the electric guitar has a very specific texture to it, the arrangements are very maximalist, it's jazz fusion but very electronic, and that's why I love it. Sin and Punishment soundtrack was composed by Toshiya Yamanaka, and he's actually talked about his inspirations when it comes to his musical style in an interview. As you can imagine, it was the guitar that brought me in. It was an era when fusion was still called crossover in Japan. I listened to Santana and was really amazed. I only ever went to 2 concerts when I was young, Kazumi Watanabe and Cassiopeia. Seeing him play live on stage was so impressive to me. It gave me the nerve and courage to start learning to play myself. He later goes on to talk about his creative process and the equipment he used. Well, the only instrument I used to compose that music was the Roland SC88 Pro. Balancing a lot of sounds is actually very difficult for me. I use the expression wall of sound to refer to my own music style. I'm not very good at using space like some other composers are. So as someone who composes music myself, Yamanaka's usage of synths and electronic equipment to create jazz fusion had a major impact on me, and it's a big reason why I love Sin and Punishment's soundtrack so much. It is a very unique take on the genre. So yeah, jazz fusion has a very long history with video games. It's one of my favorite genres, and these songs are just some of the best of what the genre has to offer, in my opinion. But are there any more jazz fusion songs in video games that you want to highlight? Comment if you have thoughts, support if you like, and subscribe to support. It's GK. Peace out.